Thank you so much for taking your time joining the Windows Management User Group this evening for a presentation on deployment of Windows 7. As Rob said, this is an event for you guys. And I love questions. So at any time in the presentation, if you really have good questions, just shout it out, I will repeat it, and then answer it for you. So who am I to talk to you about deployment? Well, it's my working life. I've been doing it since I was about 15 years old. After school, I used to go down to a local computer shop and assemble computers and deploy them with, at the time, DOS 3. It was easy to deploy that back then. Copy a folder, done. That's it. Now it's a bigger folder or an image. I've been working with deployment ever since. I spend my time traveling around close globally, all over the world, not the Arctic, not Greenland yet, but pretty much everywhere else, and building deployment solutions or fixing deployment solutions that other people have tried to set up in one way or another. I also try to spend time in the deployment community as much as I can, as much as my calendar permits me to. Just a curious question. How many in here have actually seen or read any of my posts at some time? About 60%. That's good. So apparently you like them. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. That's good. If you have any questions after the seminar, feel free to send me an email and I will try to answer them as well. We are recording this event, and this is our microphone hanging right here. So we will mix that with Rob's video and try to put it out on, I would guess, my Forum TV, right?
Yes.
Yes. All right. The demo environment for today is 4 servers, and you don't need 4 servers to use MDT, but you do need 3. We are going to talk about 2 different tracks today. The hour now, before the pizza, is about light touch. And that is doing Windows deployment without any management infrastructure. Basically deployment from a shared folder. We have a WinDE boot image. It will connect this shared folder and start the deployment. And for that solution we need 3 machines. We need 2 servers because we need an Active Directory. And any Active Directory domain should have at least 2 domain controllers. So that's why we have 2 Active Directory machines in here. They also run DNS for security reasons. And then you will have at least 1 member server acting as your deployment server, hosting the files. And if you're a larger enterprise, if you are distributed in multiple sites, this is normally the type of machine you get more of. If you have a headquarter location and a branch office, and you have 200 people in the branch office, it makes sense to have a deployment server down there as well. Replicate the content. That deployment server is called MDT01. And it's not only a file server, it's also a WSUS server for updates. It's also a SQL server for storing configuration settings about the deployment. And it's a DHCP server for assigning IP addresses. And it's a Pixie server as well. Alright. So, what is MDT? It's guidance, it's tips and tricks, it's taking someone else's pain and frustration and experience and not trying to experience that yourself. Sort of reuse what other people have already learned. Best practices. MDT is about saving money by automating as many processes as you can in deployment. And it still amazes me today to see how many manual deployments you actually found out there in the world. Either fully manual or semi-manual. But you can save a lots and lots of money by increasing the level of automation. And MDT is one of the tools and processes that will help you do that. So, it's a solution accelerator. It means it's not a product, it's a solution. I would say that it's about ready to 90%. And it's up to you to tweak the last 10% of it so it will fit your organization or it fit your customer or whatever you're building this solution for. The benefit of this accelerator is very open. It's a very open architecture. It's VB scripts, it's file shares, it's very easy to extend. And that's one of the key reasons MDT has got such success in the world. Just as of last year, there were some 300,000 downloads of MDT. So MDT is becoming a de facto standard for deployment. Compared with previously, you used to have in-house solutions. If you back just 6 or 7 years, almost every company had their own deployment solution, their own little menu, their own small batch files. And the reason was Microsoft did not provide any deployment tools at the time. You had to go to a third party, like Ghost or Altiris or ImageCast or something like that. But a few years back, these solutions started to come in play. And this solution is supported by Microsoft. So if you get stuck, you can get help. You can call a local number here in the UK, pay I don't know, £1,000 and get some assistance with it. The problem people are having with support for this solution is that they do general failure number 1 for deployment support. They call the Microsoft support person and they tell them what problem they are having. You don't do that, because you likely end up with the wrong team. I give you an example. You have an issue with you still want to use the pixie filter, even though it's not included anymore. So you call support about the pixie stuff, and the support person heard pixie, and will connect you to the Windows Deployment Services team, because they are building the pixie server. But they are not building the pixie filter. So if you call for support for this solution, make sure to tell the support person, we are using a solution accelerator, it's this MDT 2010 solution accelerator, connect me with that team. And once connected, then state your problem. And then you will be happy. So alright, again, 2 tracks for today, and the solution has 2 tracks. Light touch, shared folder, zero touch, extensions to ConfigMgr. Additional features on top of the ConfigMgr platform. It's not like you will be using ConfigMgr or MDT. It's ConfigMgr and MDT. Welcome. Hello. So starting with light touch. It can actually run on about any Windows box there is. But I do recommend to run it on a deployment server. And the higher version you get of the deployment server, the better performance you get from the deployment solution, and the more features you get from the deployment solution. For example, comparing 08 server with 03 server, in a deployment solution, it's about twice the speed from a file performance point of view. And trust me, with deployment, pretty much is file-based. A lot of file copy. With R2, with the pixie server in R2, you get the multicast multiple streams feature. So if you're deploying 3 machines at the same time, and one is a little bit slow, one is medium fast, and one is really fast, the multicast feature can now create multiple streams based on threshold values and make sure you get optimal performance on these machines. In the 2008 RTM version, the multicast there are using the same speed all the time. So it's the slowest computer controlling the speed of the deployment. Not anymore. You also need to download Wipe version 2, and with Wipe version 2 comes WinP version 3. You need, of course, MDT, and I do recommend, it's not a requirement, but I recommend to have a local WSUS server. Because MDT has a component that allows you to, during deployment, patch the machine and reboot as many times as needed. It's not an agent waiting for something. It's a step in the installation that simply go ahead and patch the machine right away. And that script can actually go to Microsoft Update as well, but it has two disadvantages. One, if you deploy 100 machines, 5 will fail, or 10 will fail, because timeout issues. If you have a local SUS server, you don't have that problem. Then you get 100 of 100 success patching. And what's the other benefit of having a local SUS server? Control, right? You can approve what patches is going out the door. If you tell the client to go to Microsoft Update directly, you get the latest update, period. If it's a patch that breaks things, oops. But if you have a local SUS server, you can control this. So use that. And I also recommend to use a local database to store the configuration. You can store all the settings in the giant text file. If you want to, it works. But trust me, a database, it's better. And it doesn't have to be a full-blown SQL. SQL Express is just as fine. It's a small database. We're talking 10 tables. Even if you have tens of thousands of computers, it's not going to get big. It will never ever break the limits of SQL Express. So, in Wipe version 2, which is basically deployment tools for Windows 7 and Server R2, they replaced a couple of utilities. In the past, you had to use different utilities if you were servicing a Windows PE image or if you were servicing a Windows operating system. Now they're all combined into one tool called Listen. And it also adds some new capabilities. For example, we can now add drivers to the OS, which we could before, but we can also remove drivers. The problem could be you deploy a machine, you have a driver in the image which is not fully compliant, and you have a third-party driver in there that you try to inject. But it fails to inject because the built-in one that you added to the image is being ranked higher and is preventing the new driver from being installed. And that way, as long as we added the driver in the past, we can now remove it and remove this blocker. I'm not so sure I like the top one here. They have a new filter driver in Windows, in Wipe version 2. And the filter driver is used when you edit Win files. You will mount them to a folder, you will do some changes, and you will commit the changes. In Wipe 1.0 and 1.1, how long did it take to mount, say, 2 gig Win file? How many seconds? 4. How many seconds now? 44. At least. 88 at some time. So it's much, much slower mounting and committing changes to the Win file. The reason is, I have been explained to me, is because they wanted to support multiple edits of Win files at the same time. In the previous version, you can only edit one at a time, rewrite. You can mount multiple, you can only edit one. So that's why they have to change this, but it's still painfully slow. New version of WinP, as I told you, is a requirement for Windows 7 deployment. No matter what tools you're using, you have to use it on WinP version 3. Then we have a new version of USMT, which is the user state migration tool, which would use to back up user state and data from a computer before wiping it, replacing it with a new OS, or replacing the entire computer. One cool feature is hard links. In the previous version, if I had 30 gigs of data on this machine, and I'm going to reinstall it, what did the previous version do? Well, it copied 30 gigs of data to a folder, It wiped everything else but that folder, applied an image, and then copied 30 gigs data back again to the same drive. That would take an hour on a laptop. In version 4, with hard links, which is enabled by default in MDT, it will simply create a symlink structure. It will create a directory tree. So it's never copying any data, it's moving it in the sort of file system table. It will take just 2 minutes, 3 minutes, no matter how much data you have. You can have 200 gigs, still 2 minutes. So it will create a tree in a special folder. It will wipe everything else, but it's not really wiping. Apply the new image and then restore the subtree again. Again, 2 minutes. That means that you can decrease the time for refresh by at least an hour, which is good. UseMT also supports offline migration. This is really cool. The previous version required you to run the backup on the live operating system. What if the operating system doesn't boot? Pretty hard to run a backup then. What you can do now is you can simply boot WinP, boot image, and you can run the backup from there. So now, if you want, and you are a bit tricky with scripting, you can actually have a bare metal scenario, pressing F12 on the machine, still doing a refresh. Back up the old one, apply new image, restore the backup. All fully automated. However, MDT does not support this by default, but can be activated. It's an open platform. The final 3 digits, or letters, characters, is for a pretty common issue. Locked files. Scenario, the user is running Outlook. The user is having a PSD file open in Outlook, and you try to run the backup. Do you think you will get a backup of the PSD file? No. It's in use. It's locked. Now, if you add this switch to the scantate command, it will actually activate volume shadow copy services and create a snapshot of that file. So you will still get the data. How many of you here have actually worked with MDT in some way? Most of you. Cool. How many of you have worked with MDT 2010? Not so many. 3 or 4 people. Okay. Most of the changes is actually in the light touch track. Not so much in the zero touch track. And the core driver was, of course, to add support for Windows 7 and the server R2. But they did a lot of changes in the deployment workbench, the utility which we use to administer all of this. So for example, you can now be more than one user doing administration at the same time. Everything you do in the UI is actually a PowerShell script in the background. And the cool thing is that, say that you import a driver. So you will go to out-of-box drivers, you will right-click, you will import, and you will import a driver. In the end of that wizard, there is a View Script button. I will show you this later. Which will give you the PowerShell script over what you just did in the UI. So it's very easy now to automate the entire setup of the workbench, of the deployment solution. Microsoft also added a lot of diagnostics, new recovery functions for network connections, and additional logging. A really cool feature is dynamic logging, real-time logging, up to a server share. So on your deployment server now, you can now, second by second, follow the deployment from the client. You don't have to go to the client if it fails. You can see it on the server.
Okay. Johan, so if you're deploying 10 machines, is it sticking 10 text files in there for you to view, or is it one?
The question was, what if I'm deploying 10 machines? Will I get one log file or 10? You will get 10. And depending on how you configure that rule, you can have it in different subfolders, and it can be named, for example, like I usually use the computer name as a variable. So in the logs folder on the server, there will be a subfolder for each machine, and in that subfolder I will find its WAL file. It makes it easier to find. So, Windows 7 deployments changes things compared with XP. As you can see, the images are slightly larger. The point is, an XP image without the installation folder is about half gigs in size. An XP Pro SP3 image. A 32-bit Windows 7 is about 2. A 64-bit Windows 7 is about 3 gigs. So we're talking about a factor 4 to 6 times larger. And that means that you actually might need to talk, communicate with the networking group or the switch people before you start the major rollout. Because, for example, if you have still, back to the branch office scenario, if you have a headquarter and you have a branch office and you have a 4 megabit line in between, in the XP days, it was possibly okay to once in a while deploy a client in a branch office and pull the image from the headquarter if needed. Because it was only half gig and you had 4 megabit lines or higher. But you don't pull a 3 gig image over a WAN link anymore. So for some reasons it might be necessary now to have more deployment servers out there. For some companies, offline solutions is more common now. Because I'm going to show you, once you built MDT as a network-based deployment solution, you can simply create an offline snapshot of it, which you can burn to a DVD or a Blu-ray, it's a big image, or a USB device, USB disk, USB hard drive, and you can drive the deployment from there. It will look and feel exactly as the server deployment, but it's done without the network traffic. If you have a sales force out there, you can simply create a DVD, mail it to them, hey, who's from this one? Pretty cool. Also built into Windows 7 now is Windows Recovery. It's a recovery WIM file in the Windows folder. So you don't need a separate partition for that. We still need separate partitions for BitLocker. And in fact, the setup will do that for you. How many of you have actually deployed Windows 7? One. For you in the back, the 100 meg partition in the root is the BitLocker partition. The setup will create it for you unless you tell it not to. There's a problem with that. You should build reference images, capture them, and then deploy that reference image, captured image. What if you have 2 volumes on the machine, on the reference installation, and you capture both, and just import it into the solution and start deploying it? If you do a manual capture, well, the default index in the WIM file will be 1 and 2, right? 1 will be the BitLocker partition and 2 will be your operating system. What do you think would be the default deployment partition? Number 1. So you take this image and you deploy it to 100 machines. They will have a BitLocker partition now. They don't have an operating system, but they have a BitLocker partition. And you are unhappy, because you will have to now visit the 100 machines and do it again. So if you are doing manual captures, pay attention to multiple volumes now, if you have BitLocker enabled. Compared with XP, we can also do offline servicing. This is where the DISM tools come in play. So in the XP days, if you needed a patch to your image, you had to deploy the image to a virtual machine, you have to apply the patch, and you have to recapture it back again. Now we can simply open the WIM, inject the patch, and close it in seconds instead of half an hour. Alright, demo. So this is my deployment server. MDT01. This is the admin UI. Most of you have seen it. Let me see if I can get Zoom up and running. I usually use 2 folders, even though you need one at least, but I use always 2. The reason why I have 2 folders is I have one folder where I create my reference images in my lab. And I have boot images that connects to that folder and do my reference image build. And I always build in virtual machines, and I highly recommend that you do too. I don't care what platform you're using, as long as it's virtual. Because it's very efficient, you can use snapshots, and it's a very closed and self-contained environment. And what if you need to move this somewhere else? Just copy the folder. It's just the folder, period. Then I have a second folder for my production images. Images which I have tested among my hardware and certified. So depending on what boot image I'm using, I will see different images and the deployment will work differently. So the way it works is that you install this utility and then you start importing operating systems. And new in MDT 2010 is that we can create folders here, a folder structure. So I have created a Windows 7 folder where I have my Windows 7 image or images, and I have an XP folder where I still have my XP images. Because the real world is like this. Everyone really likes Windows 7. It has been really hyped up, and for a good reason. It's good stuff, period. But you cannot just migrate a company in a day. It will take some time. And during that time, you still need to support their existing platform. And it's not Vista. It's XP, most times. So, good thing, the solution supports both. Just another image. Since this is our deployment share for building reference images, and since I'm using Hyper-V here, I don't need any drivers. They are built in. They are built into Windows PE, they are built into Windows 7. So the out-of-box drivers is pretty much empty. I don't need any packages either, even though I could add, for example, language packages in here. Could make sense if I'm a global company. To add a, say, Swedish movie pack or German movie pack or whatever. Then I create sequences. And in here I also have a folder structure, if I want to. We can create new folders in here. So I will have my Windows 7 sequences here, my XP sequences here, and here I have a sequence which I called capture only. If I have an existing reference machine, which I'm happy with, I can simply go to that machine, execute this sequence, and MDT will capture to an image for me. Fully automated. Stage P on disk, run sysprep, reboot, capture to a WIM file. Cool. So if you look at the sequencer, this is the start to finish setup. So for example, it will do some validation steps, make sure I'm having the right hardware, etc. And this is for installing Windows 7, not for using. It's a difference. Don't think about using Windows 7 under 2 gigs of RAM. Companies going for Windows 7, they're going for 4 or more. A big driver for 7 has been the 64-bit platform. They are going for even more. They have CAD or engineering station with 8 and 12 gigs of RAM for their CAD applications. But at least 2 for Windows 7. Then the sequence will continue. It will, for example, partition the disk. It will continue to inject drivers. It will continue to actually apply the image, whatever image I choose. And we can now also select what volume we would like the image to go to, which we could not in the previous version. Apply network settings if I want to. This is a new action, recover from domain. This is a default behavior. If the machine fails to go on the domain, this step will try again later. Here's the Windows Update point I was talking about. This is the script that will run Windows Update against my local SAS server. And it will reboot the machine as many times as needed. Then I will install my applications. I can either install multiple, through roles for example, or single applications. And then I will run Windows Update once more. The reason why I use this twice is because some applications, they might need an update before, as a prereq. And for example, if I install Office, Office needs patches, so that's why I run it after application installs as well. If it doesn't need a patch, fine, it will just continue pretty quickly. If I have a BitLocker capable operating system, MDT knows how to configure this. Then, since this is my reference building procedure, it will run syspret, restart the machine, and create a WIM file for me. The process is, take a virtual machine, start it, select sequence, wait. After about 30 minutes, there is a WIM file on the server. This is how we build reference images. It will look something like this. I take a client, and apply this snapshot, and start it. That's the wrong one. So P is now booting, P version 3. As I told you, MDT 2010 has recovery logic now. So the old issue where WinP could not connect to the deployment server is gone. And we tried for about 5 minutes in the very worst case. That doesn't mean you should not configure your switches correctly. You still should enable port fast on your switches so that the client do get an IP address on time. But only on the ports actually servicing clients. If you have trunking switches, do not enable port fast on the port that do the trunking, or you will experience a broadcast storm and the network will go down for you. So I have to log in. And as you can see now in MDT 2010, there is no command prompt window anymore. In the old version, you can just Alt-Tab and see a command prompt window. Now, I would have to press F8 to get a command prompt. So at any time I can press F8 and I get a command prompt. I can use it for troubleshooting, see the log files, etc.
Johan, is StartNet still used in 2010?
The question was if StartNet CMD is still used. No, it's actually used the WinP shell command now to launch a different shell. The StartNet is still there, and if you would remove the WinP shell.ini file, it would use the StartNet CMD file. But the reason why we don't see the StartNet CMD windows is because of this. So now you can see, I can actually see the preview in here now, folders and everything. So I can now select my enterprise Windows 7 image and click next. Click next. And now I get a second option. When the setup is done, please capture this to an image and give it this name and store the image on this folder on the server. and next. Done. What MDT will do now is that MDT will install the operating system, it will patch it. If you have assigned any applications, it will install the apps. Then it will syspread bit and capture to wind farm. Fully automated. So that means, whoa. Wow. Once you get that image, you go back to the server, and I recommend that you create a second deployment share, new term, and you will import that operating system in here. So this is where you will add your custom image. And in this production deployment share, you will have different rules. In this share, where I build my reference images, I will have rules, for example, to join it into a work group. And you can see the W subserver being specified. On my production deployment point, I will join it to a domain and add it to another view in an Active Directory. I will still patch it because there could be a gap between the time I built my reference image and I deploy my new one. We don't regenerate them every Tuesday or every monthly Tuesday. Once we have imported the OS, we can now create a full structure with drivers inside the UI. In MDT 2008, you would have to do it outside the UI. Now we can do it inside the UI. And the coolest thing about these folders is they are being resolved to variables, to the driver group variable. So if I name my subfolders after my models, for example, you can see here I did something in UI. Here is the PowerShell script over what I just did. I can create another folder, HP compact 8530. And I would recommend you to do is to use a structure like this, rather than the default plug-and-play ID mechanism with a flat structure. I think this is much more controllable. I like that. So for this model and for Windows 7, I would import the drivers here. For this model and for Windows 7, I would import my drivers here. And we can now copy and paste drivers. It's usually a single instance store with drivers. So you don't need duplicates. You can simply copy and paste if you like. It will maintain reference. So the question is, okay, I can create a structure with drivers, operating system first, platform, architecture, and then the models. How do I tie this together with the deployment? Variables. If you only deploy one operating system, you can simply go to your rules and you can say driver group 001 equals Windows 7, x86, and %model %. This is how you tie it together. Then it will resolve the model into your computer model, and since you named the folder right, it will find the drivers. If I want to have it on a per sequence based, I really don't use the rules. I use it on the sequencing. So I will go to my sequence, my Windows 7, that's not a sequence. This is a sequence. I will go to my Windows 7 sequence, And at some point before installing the drivers, I would add a variable, set task sequence variable. And I would set it, give it a name, set driver path. And I would say the driver group variable, and I would give it a value. And this time it would be Windows 7 like this. What value do you think I would set on my XP sequence? Windows XP dash whack, that's the correct value. Whack backslash and %, %. So this allows you to have a totally independent structure, give you total control, still use single instance, and still make sure that when you deploy Windows 7 to this hardware, those drivers are there. And this is important because you need to support those platforms for a while. Once we are happy with our network-based solution, I would go into advanced configuration and I can create a selection profile, which is new. So for example, I can create a new selection profile called offline Windows 7. And in this selection profile, I will add my applications, I will add my Windows 7 operating systems, I will add my Windows 7 drivers, and I will add my sequences for Windows 7. I'm creating a subset here, a selection profile. And then I will say this. Then I can create the media. New media. Offline Windows 7. Selection profile. My offline Windows 7 profile selection. Next. Sorry. Live demos, right? What could possibly go wrong? I need a folder. That's the only thing I didn't have time for. They fixed it in the other UIs, but not this one. Try again. Check. Done. Now I even have separate rules on this one. So I can add my own rules in here for my offline type deployments. And when I'm not going to do this now, but when I right click and say update, it will build a giant ISO file for me, which I can simply burn to a DVD. Or I can copy the content of it to a USB stick. And if I boot the machine on that USB stick, it will look exactly as it looked when I did my network-based deployment. So, by creating driver structures like this, we solve many problems. I know this will take you surely an hour more to do, but it's worth it in the end. Because drivers is the biggest issue there is. So operating system drivers is an issue, and WinPE drivers is an issue. How do we fix boot image drivers? What I would recommend you to do is to create a Windows PE folder. Windows PE 32-bit. And of course you create a Windows PE 64-bit folder. Because if you are importing drivers for XP, say NIC drivers, and they are being added to your boot image, most of the hardware it will fail. Because WinP is not XP. WinP is Windows 7. So you should use Windows 7 drivers. So I create a folder and I make sure to import only Vista or above drivers into this folder. NIC storage, bus drivers, whatever. Things that I need in my boot image. Then I will create a selection profile. WinP. I can type either, like this. And I will select my WinP folder with drivers. So I'm pinpointing the drivers I want to have in my boot image now. And I also will do a selection profile for my Windows PE 64-bit. And select my 64-bit folder. Then I go to my properties on my deployment share. I go to my WinP settings and I select my 32-bit selection profile. You can see now we have 32-bit tabs and we have 64-bit tabs. And since I have a selection profile now, I can actually select to get every driver from that profile. Because I have made very sure I only import the driver I want to use. I have done the selection already. MDT doesn't have to do it for me. And the same thing for 64-bit. I would use my 64-bit selection profile like this. This is how we solve driver issues with boot images. Dead easy. Only the drivers that you add to that folder is going to end up in the boot image, period. No matter what you do in the other folders. Another common issue with Windows 7 and also actually Windows Vista is graphic drivers. You deploy a machine, you have imported the right driver, and when you boot the machine, it has the standard VGI driver installed. Everyone see that? Raise your hand. Yes. Most of those times, it's not because the driver is wrong, it's because of scratch space. Because it's a component in this that was package manager that will inject the driver. And it will inject the driver in WinPE. And WinPE's scratch space by default is 32 megs. And NVIDIA driver is 80. And it's really hard to fit 80 meg in a 32 meg buffer. So it failed. You can see it in the load slide. But now what we can do is that we can set this scratch space. And this is something you should do, period. 128 works fine. Maximum is 512, but I haven't seen over 128 yet. Maybe next version of the graphics driver. Also for the 64-bit image, of course. I will set the scratch space. Cool. Questions? You are awfully quiet, or it's awfully late.
I have a question.
Yes.
Going back a little bit, all these new features, you said that MDT 2010 will install in 2003, Server 2008. Are any of the features limited to, say, you have to have 2008 for all these features to work, or do they all those new features work on 2003 servers as well?
So the question is, if I try to summarize it, are some features required for, no. Do I need certain operating system levels to get all the features? Right. The only feature that is actually required Server 2008 and upwards is multicast. On the deployment share, I can select this one, this checkbox. If you select that, it will do multicast for your deployments. So that will require server 2008. Other from that, no. The only difference is speed. A 2008 file server is much more performant than any O3 server. So that's what you're missing. Additional questions?
If you're deploying XP to some old hardware that hasn't got Vista drivers, NIC drivers for example, can you still run an older version of Windows PE to boot from?
So the question was, what if I'm deploying XP and there is no driver for WinP in it?
Well, so you need NIC drivers, and you haven't got NIC drivers with Vista support.
Often there are NIC drivers with Vista support. If there is not, they usually works in WinP as well, because they are simply compatible. Otherwise, someone at this point would complain. Because WinP has been around for 4 years now. Every deployment solution on the planet is using them now. The drivers are there. I might not have seen all, but I've seen a lot. I've been to customers with 140 hardware models. Those drivers work. The only thing you need to think about and pay attention to is to import the Vista and above drivers in here and use the selection profile, and make sure to import the XP drivers in here. And then on the XP sequence, tell it to use those drivers, so you don't get a mix. That's where most of the problems are. The XP driver is accidentally being inserted into the boot image and it will fail.
But what if there isn't a Vista driver for, say, the chipset for HP D510 or something like that? What do you do in that?
So the question was, what if there isn't, for example, a chipset driver? WinP rarely needs a chipset driver. The core pieces that WinP needs is NIC and storage. And there are very few dependencies on chipset there. So I haven't seen that problem, actually. But you can import chipset drivers as well, you can. And some XP drivers, they do work, but it's more like an exception than a rule. So you can try.